Good evening, and thank you for joining the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park for tonight's Community Conversation series. This program is being presented using the webinar version of Zoom, and attendees are joining in listening mode only. Please send any questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any point during the program, and we'll do our best to answer them within the time we have allotted. Please note that this program is being recorded and may be posted on our YouTube channel at a later date. Should you get disconnected, simply use the link that was emailed to you earlier to get back into the program. April Dinwiddie is a Black, biracial, transracially adopted person and a nationally recognized thought leader on adoption, foster care, and multiracial families. After years of branding and communications work in industries ranging from retail fashion to airlines, April committed fully to her personal passions as the chief executive of the Donaldson Adoption Institute. She is the founder of Adoptment, a mentoring program that matches fosters youth with adopted adults, and also hosts Born in June, Raised in April, What Adoption Can Teach the World, a podcast about adoption, identity, and family. April's work centers on helping individuals, families, corporations, nonprofit organizations, schools, and other government agencies build skills and capacity to authentically embrace differences of family structure, as well as race, culture, and class. April is a founding member of Westerly Anti-Racism Coalition, Westerly ARC, and I'll now turn it over to our partner and moderator for this series, April Dinwiddie.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for the warm welcome and for the partnership. It's a joy to be here. It's a joy to be joined by several leaders in our community who are here to share and be in conversation. First in the series, I am going to share a little bit of background and kick us off. I will let folks know that as we move through the conversation, we would welcome you to put your questions in the chat. That is part of the functionality that we have in the webinar format here. So we will be welcoming questions after I share a little bit of time with our guests this evening. So if you have something that you'd like to discuss or have a follow-on question or a new question, please put it in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as we go. And this will be recorded. And I always say you can record it, but we have to ask the panelists after if it's okay to archive it and put up, but we hope that will happen. And you can watch it at your leisure or share it with other folks as well. So please do use that chat functionality and know that you will be able to circle back to this at any point, should you wish. So this has been a really fun way to materialize some of the work of ARC and in partnership with the library in Wilcox Park. And I'm just going to share a little bit of background with everyone as we get started, and then I'll welcome our panelists for this evening. I'm really grateful that we've had the ability to bring this conversation to everyone. And it really has been a time where we're looking at, hold on, bear with me. Here we go. Real partnership between us, ARC, and the Westerly Public Library in Wilcox Park. And it became out of conversations with Amanda and Brigitte to advance conversation with local leaders in service of the community. So here we are together. Before we move forward, I do want to acknowledge that we are right at the almost start time of Yom Kippur, and I hope that anyone who is joining this evening that will be honoring this high holiday in the Jewish faith, that you have an easy fast, and knowing that at sundown you will start your fast. Please know that if you don't stay the whole time, we honor that and recognize that, but we hope that you have an easy, meaningful, and prayerful 24 hours. So we welcome you, but we also know that you are heading into a time of reflection. So we're thinking of you, and thank you for joining. I want to talk a little bit about Westerly Public Library in Wilcox Park and then ARC, and then we'll get into a little bit about the conversation this evening about learning and growing. So we all know this community centerpiece and this center of gravity for us. It really, for as long as I've been in Westerly, has been a center of gravity, and appreciate the mission, the vision, and the leadership of the Westerly Public Library through their staff and their board, and thank them for their partnership for these conversations, this series of 3. Westerly ARC, some of you may know, we are a coalition of a few founding members who have started year-plus protests and peaceful gatherings on the steps of the post office that turned into a formal coalition of founding members who are rooted in building this community for a more even beautiful future than it has right now. And we believe in embracing multiculturalism, educating the townspeople and the community in terms of anti-racist, anti-bias, and cultural awareness. And we want to empower local and civic leaders. And part of bringing leaders to the table at a conversation like this is, of course, to hear from them, and we appreciate that, but it's also to talk as a community about how can we support our local leaders? What can we do to lift them up and give them the support that we need? And also, as part of a community, to be accountable to each other as a community. So ARC really believes in all of this, with the centerpiece being education. The series will begin tonight with this back to school, never too old to learn and grow. And we'll think about and reflect on what we've learned over the last 18 months or so. In October, we're going to come back on the 13th with another conversation about the masks we wear, the symbolism of masks, having to wear them, both as we think about celebrating the Halloween time and what costumes and masks look like, and what the masks have been that we've had to wear to protect ourselves, and what are the visible masks that we wear. So that will be a really wonderful conversation. And then the last one will be in November as we think about the Thanksgiving holiday, a holiday that has a complicated history, and also one that oftentimes families gather. What does it look like to make room for all people at our holiday table, and are all truly welcome at our holiday table? So look forward to those conversations that we will be hosting coming up. You can find us on social media, Westerly Library in Wilcox Park, Westerly ARC, and I'm on social media and all the things, June and April. Please find us, be in conversation with us, and we'd love to hear from you. A few things as we start this conversation, of things I call the ABCCs, some norms and values as we enter the space, to actively listen, to try to avoid assumptions, and to listen as much as you talk. We don't have a full two-way conversation here, but we can use, again, the chat functionality. So if you have a question, please seek clarity and ask us. Be present, stay checked in. Some of this will get complicated. I have a lot of respect and love for the folks coming to this conversation as panelists. I'm ultimately here to make sure that they have a good experience and deliver their messages to all of you, but really to stay checked in at a conversation that's centered in complexity, and then commit to this community. Be aware how others are experiencing this space. You may know someone that may be participating, and if they need a little check-in after, or if you might need a check-in, ask for it, and then be open to supporting other community members should there be a topic or something that come up that may be difficult for them. And last, confidentiality. Obviously, if we decide that put this is communication out, it will be in the public domain, but I always kind of put a finer point on confidentiality. What does it look like to share a little bit of reflection of a conversation, but not to, oh, can you believe what he said or she said? What does that confidentiality really look like? And how do we play back a conversation of what someone else said in service of growth and exploration? And a few more guiding principles. Even the most vigilant eyes have blind spots. Let's just say we think we're doing all the things, we're reading all the books, we're talking about how to be more culturally competent and diverse. We have blind spots, and maybe tonight we'll fill some of those in. Maybe we'll have you thinking about things you hadn't thought about yet. Also, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours. He has great books, one of them being Outliers, and he talks about taking 10,000 hours of practice to be expert in something. I always ask folks, like, how many hours do you really have about centering in conversations that are complex? Like, how many hours have you really logged in? Tonight we'll be logging in some of those hours. And then really, this is all about honoring our collective journey of humanity. We have a lot of work to do as a society, as a small community, but it starts with our shared humanity and wanting to level up to be a better community than we are today. And so we are all at different places along that journey, and we honor that and we make space for that. A few foundational elements. I believe in healthy identity development. It starts with all of us and who we are, how we ask that question, how we show up in spaces. Then we can build stronger relationships. And that's not just to human beings, but it's to hard things and hard topics. And then when we do all that, it makes the hard stuff about facing and embracing difficulties and differences easier. So that's kind of the flow of some of these conversations. You'll get that as we go through, and we'll be learning about different people's identities tonight and how they have navigated this last few years. We are centering on this topic since it's back to school time, never too young to learn and grow. We're sending a lot of kids off to school in our community and around the country. But what is it like to think about us as adults and what we've learned and how we continue to be on this journey of growth? I'll tell you, when I think about back to school, I get a little anxious. I'm like, I hear the peep frogs, it's getting darker earlier. Oh my gosh, I have to go back to school. And I think about all the things that I had to learn through school and through this community. And it wasn't always like a joyful time. So learning can be hard. And that's what I want to sort of start this conversation off with. We're going to talk about, who are you? Some of the lessons you've learned in your relationship to Westerly, again, this past 18 months. And then how are you facing and embracing difficulties and diversity in your work? So a little bit before we go on, a little bit about me, some who don't know, Tom and Sandy Dinwiddie, my parents who adopted me. They had 3 kids before me, born to them, my older brother, Tad, my next brother, Jim, and then my sister, Dawn. And they just wanted another girl. They wanted 2 and 2. And they decided that adoption was the easiest path to get there. They wanted to be parents again, and they adopted me. I came into the family, into the community as a foster to adopt, and then was welcomed to the family formally, legally, when I was probably about 2 years old. This community is my center of gravity. And since I can understand this community, it's been a place that I love, and also am not afraid to talk about the complexities of that and my family structure and all the things. So I talk very openly about that and respectfully. Before I was adopted, I was born to Helen June. Helen was my mother of origin. She was 33 when she had me. She had children before me and children after me. I was the only one that she relinquished. Learning about her through family members, I found her. She was easy to find, hard to make a relationship with. But now I'm in reunion with other members of my biological family on my birth mother's side, sisters, half sisters, cousins, and all the things. And you'll see a theme in these names. Helen June is my mother of origin. Junebug was my grandmother, and Debbie is my half sister, and June is my niece. You see a theme with June, right? My name at birth was June. That's what Helen named me. She named me June Elizabeth. Tom and Sandy just decided that they liked the name April. They didn't know I was already June. So everything I do is born in June, raised in April. And then everything I do attached to that is about answering some of the questions that I had growing up, right? Where did I come from? How did I get here? Who are all these people, and why are they all so white? Right? We didn't talk a lot about this stuff in my family. My family is amazing. I talk very openly about them and with respect. And 2 things can be true at once. I can love them dearly, fiercely, and with all my heart, and also wish that some things were a little bit different. 2 things can be true at once, right? And so today I talk very openly about my experiences, about race, class, and culture, family structure, because I didn't talk about them so much as a kid and growing up. And the way that I do that is with this calendar. It's so interesting to me, 2 names that I was given, none of which are the month that I was born. I'm born in October. So I like to use this calendar as a device, right? Every month has a theme. Every month has a way in which we can talk and really explore who we are as individuals. So that's how these kind of monthly themes have come to life. And that's what you'll see in these next few months of like anchoring to things that were already on the calendar, like this time of back to school and this theme of learning and growing. So a little bit more about going back to school and how I've arrived at being able to facilitate some of these conversations and ask the hard questions, because I've done the hard work myself and have had to do the hard work, especially around back to school time, because I would show up in class. Why do I look so different from the other kids, mostly white? Why am I the only one that's adopted? Mostly children that were in their families of origin. Why does my family structure have to be different? Are my other parents coming to get me ever, right? Because I had these other parents out there. Would they ever come to get me? They didn't, by the way. It was all in my brain. I hope they don't make us do that family tree project, right? Again, because the family tree project was really complicated for me. And who am I? Like, who am I? Like, who am I really, right? I'm attached to these families and these structures. So these are all the things that were playing in my little kid brain. And over time, I've gotten to some of these answers, but it's taken a lot of work and a lot of labor. So when we talk about identity, with adoption, people have just expected adopted persons to do this healthy identity work without really helping them sort of navigate and guide through that. And when I look at the arc of my identity journey and how intentional it's been, I wish everybody could go on this journey. I don't wish everybody be adopted because it's kind of hard and it's also beautiful, but I wish everybody would be that thoughtful and self-reflective, but it takes a lot of work. And as individuals, we do this work, but also as a community, we can do it. And I hope that's kind of what we can do tonight a little bit. So as I think about the last 18 months, both with the pandemic and with the increase in the need for looking at social justice, I think it all comes back to who are we? If we don't know who we are as individuals, it's really hard to navigate complicated things. Who do we choose to be around? How do we choose to spend our time? Are we safe? Who is safe for us? It really starts with who we are as a collective. And these are the few things that have played out over the last 18 months for me. And I want to share them with you. And I'm going to turn right into the panel. There's a lot of themes, and I'm going to just hang on a few. Loss, isolation, trauma, hypervigilance, family separation, and lack of power and control. I'm going to hang on just a few of these. First is loss. And when we think about the pandemic, I just want to hold some space for anybody that's been impacted, right, by COVID, has lost a family member, has been separated from family members, has had the loss of their ability to move through the world freely. Loss is a really deep thing, and often we choose to not talk about loss. There is no more our ability to not talk about loss is gone. We have to talk about it. It's sad. And I hope that anybody who has had losses related to COVID is getting the softness and the support that they need from family, community. But we have to talk about loss. And when we do, it's powerful and healing. So what have we lost, both as maybe potentially people and loved ones, which is really heart-wrenching, but what have we lost in terms of being able to move through the world and life being what it was before the pandemic? If we can acknowledge grief and loss, and we can resist the urge to steer out of the hard things and practice self-care, we'll be able to move through the world in an elevated way. So that I've learned that we have to talk about loss. I knew that before the pandemic. The pandemic has put a finer point on it. Loss of power and control, or lack of power and control. My whole life, I didn't have access to health history, even who I looked like, right? I had no power and control. I had no power and control over my identity for a long time, right? But now we've all had this like lack of power and control of information and the ability to move through the world. Steve Jobs is an interesting story. He's adopted. He was adopted. He's no longer with us, but he was asked, like, why is adoption sometimes about being rejected versus selected? And he says, it's like we were left out of the loop, out of the most important decisions of my life. So this is a theme, right? These important things that are going on in the world, we want to be involved. We want to know about them, but it's hard when we're not getting good information, when we have a lack of maybe access to things that we think we need. Lack of power and control is really an important thing. Feeling powerless, the acknowledgement of feeling powerless and how that can affect us and how we get activated, right? And the idea of like noticing when we've had power and when we have a lack of power. And then the last is, how can we maybe think about what it feels like to not have power and how that can impact us and have empathy for others who may have less power than we have. And the last is having to move with precision. And this is something that's interesting. And this happened right away when the pandemic started happening, when I was noticing a lot of people saying, man, I'm so tired when I have to go to the grocery store and put a mask on and worry about how far away I am from other people. I thought, gosh, I feel like I've had to do that my whole life, right? As an adopted person, as a transracially adopted person that's navigated majority white spaces for the better part of my life, I feel like I always have to move with precision. I have to mind my space so that I'm safe, so that I don't maybe intimidate another person. And I'm a light-skinned brown woman. I'm not a tall, dark man, right? So what does it mean to have to move with precision? And how is it to have to view the world as a potential threat, right? The COVID is a potential threat. When we walk around, we're scared of other people, maybe infecting us or infecting others, right? But to me, it's much bigger than that. And some of the lessons I've learned is like, how has this sort of taught more people about what it's like to have to move with precision in the world. And it's a hard lesson because guess what? It's exhausting, right? How have you felt having to have your personal operating systems dramatically changed because you can't go where you want to go? You can't move as you did more freely. And how has that maybe helped us learn to be empathetic for others? And then understand what type of energy it takes to have to navigate spaces in a way that's much more thoughtful than maybe we were having to do that in the past. So first, I want to make sure I'm going to check in with everybody real quick. Just, I want you to notice, I shared some things about my family, about myself, about this pandemic. And just check in to see how you're feeling right now. Take a deep breath, go get a cup of tea, whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable and safe, because we are going to move into the panel now. But a lot of this stuff is hard. A lot of stuff is hard to talk about. And just notice how you're feeling, what you need. If you need to go take a break, please do so. But I do wanted to just center in on that part of the conversation so that we could open it up to the panel. So that was a lot in a little bit of time, but I really just wanted to set us up and tee us up for what we're going to do next. And I want to welcome the panelists to the conversation. Brigitte Hopkins, the executive director of the Westerly Public Library and Wilcox Park. Tim Flannagan, a Westerly resident and educator in Stonington Public Schools, and Chief Sean Lacey, the leader of our town's law enforcement. So welcome to you all. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to all who are listening. We're grateful that you're here. First and foremost, I want to kind of welcome everyone. And Brigitte, I'll start with you and your connection to Westerly. How you got here? What are the best parts of Westerly? What are the things you wish Westerly might upgrade? But tell us your connection to Westerly.
Yeah, so I actually started my position in January of 2014, and that's how I really got connected to Westerly. My husband had started working here about a year prior to that. So he was already connected, and moved my 4-year-old son, and I was pregnant at the time, which I didn't really know until I had just started. And so I'm raising my 2 kids here, and I'm involved. My husband's involved. He's, on the planning board and building subcommittee and coaching Little League or wrestling or whatever. So we're committed. We love it here. We're excited to raise our kids. And I think I always say that when I first came to Westerly, I could sense the pride that everyone felt for their community. You knew that everyone just loved Westerly. And it was sort of contagious. So that there's a lot of good things here to offer the community members and visitors alike. And it's relatively quiet and safe, especially compared to other places I have lived in the past. I personally feel safe walking down the street at night. Again, different perspectives. People have lived different lives. Maybe the people that have lived in Westerly all their lives may not feel that way. And I think moving to the community, I felt very welcome, but I have also heard that not everyone has felt welcome moving to the community, because if you weren't born here, then you're not from Westerly. So that's a lot of, the first few things that I've heard about Westerly. And, being a community leader and participating in certain things and listening to town council meetings and being, involved in political things. I think that I wish people listened a little bit more and didn't jump to conclusions. And I talk to my staff all the time and say that we should try to approach things that everyone has the best of intentions. That they have a different perspective on things than you do. So maybe they know something that you don't, and that's why things are happening the way they're happening. And really trying to be, I don't want to come across as being naive, but I think if that's a good approach. I just sent an email to all of my staff. I send out weekly reminders of your awesomeness to staff, and just talked about, about happiness and why are some people happier than other people? And, you have to want to be happy. Wake up being optimistic that today's going to be a good day, and you make it happen. So, that's why I'm glad that you asked us to be on this panel, because I think collectively we can help this community be better.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Two things can be true at once. You could really love this community and want to see it grow and evolve. And I really appreciate your presence here and your ability to jump into this conversation with us and to share your connections and your desires and your hopes for our town. We'll get into a little bit that more. I'm going to go to you next, Tim. Your connection to Westerly, what you love about it, and what you wish maybe was better or different.
Thanks, April, for inviting me to join this panel. It's a great honor to be here. And so my connection to Westerly started as a child. I grew up in a suburb of Hartford, and we used to come down to Misquamicut every summer for day trips, and sometimes we'd rent a cottage for a week. And so I just always loved this area. And then when I was 30, I was moving back from overseas, looking for a teaching job in Connecticut, and applied to all kinds of places and ended up with a job at Pawcatuck Middle School just over the border, and eventually settled here in Westerly. And several years later decided to adopt my sons. In the meantime, I had done some foster care. So I have an unofficial son who is a former foster child who's now 36. So he lived with me for a year and also had a weekend room at my house for many years, and even moved back in when he was an adult. And then he became an older brother to my two adopted sons, who I adopted from Brazil. So when I first came to the area, I thought I'd teach here for a few years and maybe go back overseas. But after adopting my sons, who were 9 and 10 at the time, this became our home. And my sons loved growing up in Westerly, and they are Black and brown children. They grew up in a mostly white community here, but whenever I talked about we could live in Brazil if you want to live in Brazil, they really grew to love this community. And I know there's things they would like to have been differently as well, but this became home for us. So that's really my connection. I love, it was a good place to raise my sons. I love all the things that we all love about Westerly, the beaches, the parks, Wilcox Park, amazing. And like Brigitte said, I like that it is a destination that we get visitors. And when you look around, we get quite a diverse mix of visitors. And I just actually hosted a family the other night from Colombia who were passing through the area, and they stayed with me. And they were astounded by how beautiful it was. And I love having people come from other parts of the country or other parts of the world and visit and really enjoy what Westerly has to offer. And I also agree with Brigitte saying that it's safe. It feels like a safe place to me. And I know maybe not everyone feels that way, but I do feel that it is a safe place. What I want to change, the first thing that comes to mind is that I do wish it was a more diverse place in terms of race and culture and ethnicities and languages. And it's interesting, when I adopted my sons, I realized that there was a lot more diversity in Westerly than I had seen. And it's kind of interesting because when you start to look for it, you realize, wow, my sons got on a bus. They didn't speak English when they came here, but they got on a bus every morning with Hispanic students, Spanish speakers, with many Chinese students, and some of their first friends were kids from around the world who were also taking English language learning classes here in Westerly Public Schools. And I didn't even know these people were here. So there is diversity. I don't want to say that there isn't, but I do wish that there was, that we had more diversity, and I think that makes a place more interesting and more rich. I wish we had more venues like the newly renovated and United Theater, places like that. And again, we have some, but I think more places that will attract a diverse range of performers and artists and material and people to come and visit. I just love our location, that we're kind of between New York and Boston. But one thing I would change is we need a better, more reliable, cheaper train to New York right from our Westerly train station. I would love to just hop on the train and go to New York. Boy, every time I look at the prices, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll drive to New Haven and take the train from there. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So nice of you to reflect on some of what you've come to grow to love about this community and things that you want to maybe see to shift and change. And what does it look like to be meeting all that diversity that's here in the town and really celebrating it and embracing it. And now, Chief Lacey, your relationship to Westerly, what you love about it, what you wish were different, if there's anything, and just welcome to the conversation. Appreciate you for being here.
Again, thank you for having me tonight. It's certainly my pleasure to participate. I'm a little bit different than the two of you. I was raised in Westerly. I went through the Westerly school system. I actually was born in London, Connecticut, but we ended up in Westerly. I came from a family of divorced parents, remarried, so I have the whole family tree, as you explained, April, that it can be very convoluted if you start talking about step brothers, sisters, step grandparents. I mean, it's huge. So I'm very familiar with that. But I came to Western, I was about 6 years old, and I went through the school system, elementary, middle school, high school. And I went off to college, like most did, and I came back. And I've been on the police department for 34 years. So I've been seeing quite a, as much as I say, you think you've seen it all, believe me, every day goes by, I haven't seen it all. So I'm married. I began dating my wife in high school. And so we've been married coming up on 31 years. So, we raised 3 daughters. I have a 29, 26, and a 24-year-old daughter that grew up in town, went through the school system, and went off to college. And then one of them's in New York now, and one of them's in Washington, D.C., and one of them's in town and is a teacher at Nuns Corner School. So my kids are gainfully employed and doing well. We live in a great community. I always say, as kids growing up, you can't wait to leave the community to go try something different and go somewhere else. But many people seem to wander back because it is a wonderful community. You can travel to different communities all over the world, as some of you mentioned, already, and you find that Westerly it's a wonderful place. I mean, I thank you guys for saying you feel safe in the community. I guess that makes us feel good on the public safety side. But it is, all in all, it is a safe community. I mean, crazy things happen like they happen everywhere, but all in all, I would like to think anyone could walk around in the park and feel safe walking through the park at nighttime, as I do 7 nights a week as I'm walking my dogs around. But so it is a safe community. It's a good community. It's a well established community. I mean, it's a financially sound community, and I think it's a great place for people to raise their children. In the Westerly school system. I mean, it's a wonderful school system. I tell people, we have a wonderful community with beautiful beaches, some of the best beaches in New England. We're a unique community in that we have an airport and a train station. Many communities do not. We have a hospital, again, that we share with other communities. So it's a very welcoming community. The diversity end of it, yes, it's much different now than it was when I was in school, 30 years ago, or 35 years ago. There was very low, minority rate, I would say, in the school system when I was there. But it has changed. A lot of things have changed. You've seen a lot more diversity in the community now. Not a ton, I must say. And it opens your eyes to things in the different cultures and different lifestyles people live. And we learn that through the police side of things, as we respond to calls and deal with their issues and troubles and so forth. And it's kind of interesting to see how different sides lived and how family structures are made up with different diversities and so forth. And I do agree with Brigitte in saying, we have to look, everyone has different perspectives on everything. And we certainly have to respect everyone's perspective. We all have a tendency, or many do, and all of us included, I guess, you meet someone for the first time in the first 2 minutes and you stereotype them and you have a, you have a feeling on what you think of them. And I guess, you have to be open-minded about all that and so forth. So I think it's just a wonderful community. I enjoy living here. I enjoyed raising my family here. I will probably continue to stay here and retire at some point someday and travel, but I'm sure Westerly will always be my home. I'm assuming my other two daughters may end up back here. They always happen to wander back. You say, what can the community do better? And that's an interesting question, because I always say, well, what do I think? And looking at the different things in the community, do I think can do better? And there's so many wonderful things about it. It's hard to criticize the community and say, what do you come up with that you don't like about it? But, we all know, and if any of you, if you've tried living in the community, it's very difficult. Housing wise, financially, we definitely do not have enough housing for affordable housing levels. It definitely is. We're way below the spectrum on that, considering the income level that people make and the house prices in town. And we all know everything's ballooning at this point. Is that it's very hard for somebody to afford a house in town, and without husband and wife both working decent jobs to afford a mortgage on a property in town. And even the other side of it's very hard to even find an apartment in town. If you know anyone trying to find a rental in town, it's an absolute almost impossible to find something. Or the rents are high enough, it's totally unaffordable. If you go on and look at apartments available for in town, it's slim to none. So as a result of that, we've seen more homeless. We've seen more transients staying in hotels over the winter. We've seen, the shelter, the warm shelter is another phenomenal institution in town that assists many, but they're full. They're full to the, to capacity. So I think in what we could do better, I think is all. It takes a community to do it, but basically come up with more housing plans, arrangements, availability for people to welcome the more diverse crowds or people or families or so forth into town, to be able to share the experiences of this community and let them live in it.
Yeah,
So,
I think you make a great point, John. Thanks for sharing so much about your connections to Westerly, your family connections, and being, even just naming the idea of family structure. I mean, diversity comes in many shapes and sizes, and family structure is one of them. We don't often talk about that, but not matching the norm in a family is in a community like Westerly can add to the layers of how you're seen and how you're treated and how you feel in going into school or just being in the community. So I appreciate you for sharing that. And also this idea of housing is so critically important because it is tied to diversity and it's tied to economics. And we all know that diversity and economics and marginalization fit into the same spectrum. And I love that one of our founding members of ARC, Kevin Lothar, is part of the planning committee now in the town. And I really think that as we've continued to figure out how to meet the moment and welcome more diversity to the leadership tables, that will help shift some of these perspective. So it's great to see that the town council passed almost unanimously -1 a multicultural committee, which will help sort of advance some of this. So, as leaders in this town and other communities nearby, it will really be a wonderful path forward to try to bring in more voices and that. So I really appreciate your sharing of this. And I'm going to talk about 2 different areas tonight and ask some questions. One is, what COVID, right, the pandemic has taught you and has impacted you, and hold some space for those impacts, and how it maybe, having to move in the world in a restricted way, how to take care of ourselves. How has that helped you think about your professions and what you have to do at work and your personal lives? And then also about social justice. And, as white people, I mean, there's a reason why y'all are white. And we have you on this panel to talk more about some of what you've had to navigate, and do so in a vulnerable way. So again, appreciate you for being here. So we're going to talk about both of those 2 things, and we'll open it up for questions. If folks have questions, remember, you can put them in the chat, or we'll hold some time at the end and invite people to do that again. So first, I'm going to stay with you, Chief Lacey, because the pandemic has impacted the world, but closer into a community. I'm wondering, like, what you're seeing the impact, not just from your transactional standpoint, right? Like things you have to do to meet a pandemic, because those are big, heavy lifts. We get that on top of the jobs you're already doing. But really talk to me about some of the things I talked about, like having to move with precision and having to organize yourself in a different way. Has that impacted you? And has it had you think about power and control and being able to have the ease in which to move around the world that has been restricted? And has that impacted you and how you do your work? So it's a big and complicated question, but I think you can handle it.
It is, and we could probably talk hours about it and debate it, about hours. But the whole COVID situation has had a tremendous impact on the personal side, family side, work side. This, we kind of got, as we know, this was brought upon us not by anyone's choice, and we were. The public safety side had to roll out this whole thing with testing and the whole thing with the vaccinations. And as of last winter, we were wrapped up through 6 months, all the way through June. We were doing 600 to 800 people twice a week at the senior center, administering the whole vaccinations, organizing doctors and vaccinators and volunteers. And it was, upwards of 1,700 volunteer hours of volunteers. And we had calling centers set up at the station. This is stuff I've never done. I've been in this 34 years. I've never done anything like this. If you told me 2 years ago we'd be dealing with a pandemic, I would have looked at it like your head was on backwards. So we had to adapt. The police department, we had people at work testing positive. We're dealing with COVID patients today, just still to this day, on a daily basis on calls that are positive for COVID, and trying to keep those people changing the rules and policies and testing and what to do with someone if they're exposed and if they test positive for and they're out, and how to deal with time off and making sure our shifts are staffed accordingly. We're still currently running a testing facility at the station where we're doing PCR and rapid testing, and they're doing upwards of 150 to 200 tests per day still at the station. That's been going on from June, and for the unseeable future, we're going to be doing that until we can probably wrap this whole thing up. So it's definitely, I never knew what Zoom was until COVID started. I mean, you talk about a change in so meetings then went to Zoom. Had no idea how to download it, how to get a webcam for my computer at work, as we all did at work, and to get us set up for this new environment we were getting used to. But I can tell you how quickly we adapt in society, and the town adapts to the changes, the restrictions, the mask wearing. You can't go anywhere. You can't go to restaurants. If you go into airports, there's all kinds of restrictions in place. Our whole life was just about turned upside down on what we can do, and basically stripped us of the freedoms that we're so used to having. And how we, and I think it brought groups of people together to some extent, because we're all in this together. I mean, it doesn't make any difference of what nationality, anything whatsoever you are. We're all under the same set of rules at this point. And I have to say, in doing the vaccination clinics that we did, it was so overwhelming, the appreciation for the people that were there getting the vaccines that we were assisting, and they were so thankful. It was so rewarding at the end of it. So a lot has changed on the police side of things. So now, you fast forward, we start going back into meetings. You can start having meetings again. Well, I kind of like sitting in my office being on a Zoom. If I got a 10 o'clock meeting in Providence, I can log on at 9:59 and I'm at the meeting at 10, and I can keep doing other things as I'm at the meeting. I'm not having to socialize with anybody. And 10:45 when the meeting's over, I'm back to, usually I'd be driving an hour to Providence to get to the meeting early. I'd be stuck talking to people, and I say stuck not in a bad way, after the meeting, socializing, establishing and continuing relationships and so forth. And then driving back, half my day would be shot over one meeting. So now that we're back into that, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to drive. I kind of enjoy. So I find myself emailing, is there a possibility to Zoom this? Because it makes it, we're all looking, it's an easier way out, but it has an impact on the social side of things. I mean, people, what we've learned, our mental health calls have gone through the roof as a result of this. I mean, tremendous increase in mental health calls, substance abuse, people self-medicating as a result of this. And some people find they isolate themselves as a result of these restrictions, and they don't want to come out. I mean, they kind of get into that rhythm of things, and to get people out and get them to, we live in a society that we have to socialize, we work. And so those are some of the crazy changes and stuff. As far as the family goes, I told you I have one child, my daughter works for the Bronx Zoo in New York, and she couldn't come home. She could shoot through this whole, because again, the whole restrictions on state to state. So again, you weren't seeing family. We're on Zoom. We had holidays and Thanksgiving. She couldn't come home for Thanksgiving. We couldn't travel, which we usually go to for Thanksgiving. My daughter in DC, the same thing. She had taken a furlough at work, so now there's unemployment. I mean, it's just tremendous impact on families financially. Their whole, kids that are in college. My kids are just starting out in their careers. And it's a total, I mean, it's a total complete change for everyone. It basically turned everyone's life upside down, but we adapted. We certainly did. And the things that we like out of that, we would prefer to kind of keep. And now we find ourselves, we started coming out of it, and people kind of went about their, way. And now you see some of the restrictions starting to come back a little bit. And some people don't like them. And I think it's become very political now. I mean, you're either on one side or the other side. And whether the vaccinations, we just ran a vaccine clinic yesterday at the senior center. We had 11 people, 11. We were doing 600 to 800. Granted, we only anticipated probably 30, but we had 11 people. So I don't know if I answered everything you were asking, but I try to touch on kind of everything and how it impacted us, and it will continue to impact us. I mean, but it's amazing how we will adapt. We just will. We will.
So is that the lesson? Is that the lesson? If you would leave folks with a lesson about the pandemic, is how you've seen folks adapt and how you've had to adapt, is that would be the lesson, is like the way in which people can adapt, right? And can change. And
there's always a downside to it too, because I talk about the mental health calls and the issues. I mean, you try, you used to going to work every day. Now you're in a household, husband and wife, both home, with the kids running around, trying to manage the kids, the dogs. You're trying to go on calls you talk about a little tension, domestic calls up. I mean, this is some of the burdens it's having on families and so forth. So which we've seen a tremendous increase in.
So it takes a global crisis and pandemic to realize that we can adapt and grow. And I love that we can, but I don't like the reason. So what are the other places where we want to adapt and grow, and what do we want to take with us as we go? Brigitte, I'm going to go to you next. What are some of the adjustments that you've had to make, and more importantly, how has some of what you've had to experience, which is unprecedented, impacted how you are a leader and what you do and how you move through your professional life?
So professionally, I feel librarians tend to do whatever they can to help their patrons, and so we're natural, helpers, and we sometimes go overboard. And it's just what we do. So especially, if we're trying to offer a program and we have no money, we get creative. Well, we got very creative. Again, they don't teach you this in library school, how to handle a pandemic, how to handle all these rules and regulations. Never wrote a control plan. I didn't even know what one was. And here I am meeting one, and had the support of the board and the staff. And so, the pandemic was very traumatic for some people. It was super isolating, but it brought out a lot of fears in people, almost to the point where they couldn't do anything. And it's interesting to think how this pandemic has affected so many different people. I've had experiences in my life that in some ways have sort of prepared me that, okay, we just have to move forward, because if we don't move forward, life stops for us. And my staff is counting on me. My family's counting on me. Patrons are counting on the library and the park. So a lot of people have said, without the library, I wouldn't have gotten through it. We continue to offer books for people to read. Sometimes that's all they had. And I'm sure a lot of other places see this, but sometimes we're the only faces or the only people they talk to for their entire day. So, we want to make sure that every experience everyone has is meaningful and important to them. And at home, my husband was working from home. We have a little office. We're fighting for space, especially when we had to go onto Zoom, and, each of us having five Zoom calls. And then I had 2 kids in school, a first grader. Well, he finished kindergarten. First grader, he can't do all of this by himself. So it was challenging. It was very, very challenging. But again, we were adaptable. We were understanding of one another's circumstances, and we just provided as much support as we could so that we could all get through it.
Yeah. And I appreciate that a lot. And it's really telling when you think about this idea, and it reminds me of Mr. Rogers, it's like, look for the helpers. And so often that we need to find the people that are going to help us, and providing that for the community is really something that is a value, and thank you for that. And I do recognize that when you think about the challenges that many of us have faced, we still had so many resources at our disposal. And I'm hopeful that at least one of the additional lessons that we learn is that it was challenging for us and traumatic for us, and we had access to a lot of resources, both in this community and our families. And one of the things that I've been leaning into recently is there's a book called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and it helps to really talk about trauma, both individual and collective trauma, and this idea of repositioning a question, not what's wrong with you? Why did you do it that way? But resetting that and saying, what happened to you? And now we all have a lot of experience in dysregulation, chaos, trauma that fewer people had. So many of us have it now. And what does that look like to maybe give grace to someone else who may have less than you have access to, in terms of the way in which to reset your life, to give grace to them and ask, how are you? What happened to you? How can I help? So I'm going to go to you next, Tim. And Tim, you have an interesting perspective on some of this kind of learnings from, having to move with precision in the world. You have 2 Black sons, 3 if you count, as you should, your informal caring of your other son. And I wonder, as a white dad, and navigating the world in a different way, does did it connect with you when I was talking about, oh, welcome to the party? Like, I've had to move in the world precisely for a long time, both in my family and in the community, having to be precise about how I do things. And again, I'm a light-skinned woman, a tall, dark Black man has to move in a different sort of way and be precise. So did that resonate with you? And if so, how so? And how did it maybe help you see your kids in a different way and their experiences that you wouldn't know because you're not Black or brown, you're white, right?
Right. Before I adopted, of course, I was aware, I'm a white man adopting 2 Black and brown children. And I need to learn about what this is all about and bringing them to a white community, and, prepared myself by going to workshops and reading books and talking to people. But that was 21 years ago, and I'm still learning about how to be a white dad to Black and brown children. I still truly am, because it is a journey. And I'm, yes, what you said, especially as a transracially adopted child, hardly a day goes by where I don't think about it. Even though my sons are now in their 30s and living outside of the home, it's very much part of my it's my work to really understand what is the world like for them and for my grandchildren now, who have 3 grandchildren here in Westerly and 2 in Florida. So thinking about their futures, 3 of whom are Black and brown children and Native children, and what is it like for them to navigate the world, and what will it be like in the future in this community or wherever they are. So I'm very, as I said, just focused on that as the work that I need to do personally. But I also do that as a teacher, obviously for my students. I work in a mostly white community in Stonington, but of course, we have students who are Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that's always been a lens that I've looked through and continue to learn about through my teaching. And in terms of the pandemic, as I was listening to the other panelists, I can relate to everything both of you said. We've all experienced this, like Chief Lacey said, we're all in this together. But something that really stood out to me was how it affected people differently, and often depending on their race or ethnicity or their income level, and how it impacted people differently. I guess, it wasn't necessarily surprised that happened, but it certainly brought it into a clearer focus that how unequal our world is, and that there is a lot of work to do to make it more equal. So I think that's been the pandemic has kind of brought that to the surface for me as well.
Thank you for that, Tim. And it's one of those things where you sort of knew about some of the inequities, and to a point, but then a sharper point, a finer point goes on the access to health, the hesitancy around vaccines and things that persons of color would have versus white persons on some level based on history and all the things. So it's a unique time to really be thinking about some of these things as we all kind of have to manage our experiences as individuals, as part of families, as part of a community, but then to try to think of others who aren't like us that may have a different intersectionality and different layers of things they have to navigate. So in thinking about that, I want to stay with you for a minute, Tim, as we shift gears a little bit to some of the other things that are happening around us, which is, this real important social justice movements, these really social justice movements happening. How have the high profile deaths of George Floyd and others given you things to think about? You wrote a beautiful blog post. I wonder if you might share a little bit of that. And again, we think about always learning, always growing. What have some of these really unbelievable, unprecedented experiences, both with the pandemic and with the social justice issues that we have? What have you learned and what have you reflected on? And then of course, I'm going to go to Brigitte and Chief Lacey, but I'll start with you and some of the things that you've related to during this time and some of the big lessons that you've learned and what lessons you wish others would learn during times like this.
So yeah, I think, even before the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery and others, there were kind of some high profile cases coming up in the news. And at the time I was teaching social studies, but of course we were teaching during a pandemic and all students were at home. Everything was new to us. But after the death of George Floyd, there was just a few weeks left of school. And it was something that I just couldn't leave the school year without addressing it with my students, even though many of them weren't even logging on. But I just thought that we can't go into the summer without talking about what's happening in the world. So that was the kind of the first thing that kind of really spurred me to make some changes. And I created some online lessons, used some of my resources through organizations that I've known from the past, and created some lessons to do online and had some good conversations with students. And then continued that, in the summer by meeting with teachers and doing some educating, reading and discussing. And then, the following year, last school year, trying to extend that work to families and students and still on that journey, of just trying to not leave it at reading books and talking about things, but talking about actions. What can we do differently to help our students feel more welcome in our school, to create more equitable schools, and to identify those blind spots, like you mentioned, that exist and that we don't see, and we need help seeing them. In terms of lessons, you mentioned my blog post, because when you asked me to be on this panel and you told me the topic about what have you learned, and I immediately thought, well, I need to write about that, and it turned into a blog post. So I started teaching 35 years ago in New Haven, and I taught for 3 years there. My blog post, I talked about a student named Malik Jones, who was a challenging student for me, an African-American student, and I was a white teacher thrown into a classroom that I was not prepared to teach. And reflecting on that, realized how I was not the teacher they needed, that these Black and brown students needed. But I was there. Unfortunately, Malik was killed in 1997. He was, a victim of a police shooting after a pursuit, and his family has fought long and hard for justice for him. And this was in 1997, and we're talking about these things still today. So as I was entering my 35th year of teaching, I'm thinking about what have I, the story of Malik comes back to me from time to time, and almost haunts me in a way. So I realized that especially over the last 18 months, some of the things I've learned is to, first of all, get involved. So joining the Westerly Anti-Racism Coalition has been a great opportunity for me to meet other people who are also on a journey of learning and sharing and trying to make our world more equitable. Learning from people every week, and meet new people every week. When I go to the Sunday protest, I highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. I learned to just stop giving into fear. I'm a world traveler. I've been to lots of places, still have a lot more places to go, but through teaching, I've been able to do a lot of traveling. And one thing traveling has taught me is to let go of fear, to take steps and just go places where people might be afraid to go. And you've always learned something new, and you always realize, like, wow, this is not what I expected. This is so much better, or people are so much nicer. We had a conversation, my new friends from Colombia who stayed with me the other night talked about that in terms of their country, that people have this, there's this image of a fearful, dangerous place that you shouldn't visit, where it's really a beautiful country. But I realize that's a lesson that applies to this as well, in terms of talking about race, bringing up these topics in the classroom or with friends or family or on forums like this, to not be afraid. The fear is kind of what keeps us from progressing. So that's been a big lesson. And along with that, I've just learned to speak up through support from like organizations like the Westerly ARC and my school and others. I've learned to use my voice and to participate, in either town meetings or speaking up at my school about topics like this. And, one of the biggest lessons that came through over and over and over as I was doing a lot of reading and learning last summer is listen to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That has come through over and over, even more recently at a Westerly Town Council meeting or a school committee meeting where several former students who are Black, Indigenous, people of color spoke about their experiences growing up in Westerly schools and knowing, just hearing their experience, like things that I didn't even know that were happening right here in my community, and listening and honoring their truth and trusting their truth and learning from their stories, I think it is very powerful. And lastly, I'd say just recognizing my own biases, in those blind spots that you mentioned, just knowing that it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't, and I try to teach my students, we all have these biases. It's scientifically proven. It's what our brain does. We have to know they exist. We have to identify them and work towards, not acting on them.
Tim, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. That blog post you wrote is really powerful. I really would recommend folks to read it. Tim, where can they find the post about Malik and your
I can put the link
in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Do that. Yes.
And I want to also just acknowledge, Stephanie, your comment in the chat, which was really well timed, and I do appreciate. We may be all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. I think that's so brilliantly said, and it's so true. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, and of course, it resonates very much with me. Brigitte, how about you? When you think about the social justice movement and the things that we've seen more globally, locally too, what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a white person navigating a world that is mostly white and Westerly, but really having a lot of will to see things change? What are some of the things you've learned?
Westerly is a lot different from where I grew up. And I had taken growing up in and going to school in a very diverse school system, I guess, for granted. Because when I actually moved to Rhode Island to attend college, and I never left. And I remember visiting my school and saying, wow, it's all farmland and white people. And it was very, very interesting. And, moving to Westerly, that was definitely something that I noticed, that it was predominantly white. But one of the things I learned, especially with us having a Columbus statue in the park, that, there's reminders of dark past for people everywhere. And, as a white person, I was not aware of it. I know I didn't know everything about Christopher Columbus. I don't think I really cared much about Christopher Columbus, but the fact that it's a reminder of negative things for people, really resonated with me. And it's been challenging because it's also a symbol of positive things for other people. So that's been quite the struggle. And I think it's something that we'll continue to struggle with, because we want to be a single community. And So I think we, need to start approaching things a little differently. And as Tim said, we really need to listen to people. We need to hear what they're saying. We need to take it in, and not put up these defenses about, oh no, what they're saying is absolutely not true. Because you don't really know.
Yeah.
You don't know. So, I think I've really learned a lot in the past year, listening to town council meetings, school committee meetings, speaking with you, talking to friends. And I think, the death of George Floyd was really a tipping point. And, I try to be optimistic and look at things, even in dark circumstances, what can we learn from this and how can we grow? So, and I think there's a lot of possibility there. And again, I'm excited that, we're starting these conversations.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, because there is the reality that we didn't create these systems that we have to navigate these days, but we can be in service of upgrading, elevating, and steering into some of the things that are hard versus trying to steer out of them because it's easier. And that has been something that has continually resonated over these last 18 months, and tapping into some of those spaces, which we talk about safety. Physical safety is one thing, psychological and emotional safety is something different. And all of those things become factors as we enter into spaces where there could be some conversation that isn't easy, and that we really are in service of this elevation, but getting there is hard. So I'm grateful to you for even being brave and bold enough to bring that up. I mean, no one wants to talk about the Columbus statue, really. I mean, like, we just want to leave that alone on some level, but we have to talk about certain things. We have to open up the conversation. And I appreciate you for doing that, and for how you've had to navigate something that you never thought you would have to, as so many of us did not. So appreciate you and here for you. I mean, as we start to come to close this conversation, Chief Lacey, I'm going to go to you, but really this is about, like, how can we help you as leaders too? I mean, you have these jobs, you get paid to do them, you volunteer, you volunteer, right? And you're getting paid. So this isn't volunteer, but you tap into a complicated reality as chief of police, as as an educator, Tim, and as an ED of a community landmark in this town. You're leading so many things, but what can a community do? And doing things for us, what can we do for you? Like, how can we help you? And I'll tell you what some of us will do, especially at ARC, will hold you accountable, right? But how can we also support you and show you love and grace as you navigate and do these things? So Chief Lacey, I'm going to wind down with you and some of the things you've learned over this last year as it relates to social justice and equity and doing the work, and really about your personal reflections. Like, these are the things that we want to know and hear, and also say, look, what are some things that we can do as a community to support you on this journey of being more equitable, being more anti-racist, anti-bias? Like, how can we as a community help support you in your work?
Well, as far as I certainly have learned a lot over the last, 18 months. I mean, like I explained, I'm from town. It's a predominantly white community. Nobody thinks they're racist or look at anything differently. And some certain things we have learned, obviously, with the death of George Floyd, obviously it opened a lot of people's eyes. There's no doubt about it, nationally, worldwide. And it put a bad light, per se, on police, as we know. I mean, there's been protests, there's been everything else against police, defunding police. And, and been doing it long enough, you take offense by it because you say, well, I'm a good guy. I don't treat people that way. I don't do anything like that. And I guess it's like anything else. you have a profession that's made up of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. There are going to be people that make mistakes. I mean, police officers have to make split-second decisions, and you're going to be criticized on those decisions. And those decisions better be the right decisions in a split second. And if not, you're going to get yourself in a situation. There's certainly nothing about, I was appalled when I watched the whole George Floyd situation. I mean, it certainly does not represent law enforcement everywhere. It does not represent what the Westerly Police Department and many other police departments are made up of. It certainly isn't. As a result of this, statewide, we have changed. And again, we all have to be willing to change things, to realize, oh, maybe something's broken. Maybe we're not doing something the way we should be, and we have to change, and we have to be willing to change. And as we get older, we all get more stubborn, and nobody likes change, right? If they told you, you got to wear a different color shirt tomorrow at work, I'd have people looking at me like my head was on backwards. But we have to be able to accept change. So we've adopted different use of force policies as a result of that, because if you remember the George Floyd, the knee on the neck and the positioning and the holding him down and so forth was greatly criticized. So it made us go back and look, wait a minute, what is our policy? Hopefully it outlines we're not supposed to be doing that, even though I would say, well, we don't do that. But it wasn't outlined that way. So the policy, statewide policy has been changed. Training has been changed for us as far as it goes. We've gone to a lot more, we're required now for mental health training, how to deal with different types of people. I mean, you think as a police officer getting thrown into any type of situation, if you're dealing with an autistic person or people with mental illnesses, and how do you deal with these people? We don't know they have them going into it, and how to deal with different things moving forward. I mean, we have to, as police, have to listen. Again, I've made it as we chatted before this started, we're only a product of the community we represent. We have to, we have to listen to everyone. We have to see what other people's feelings are and adapt to that. You talk about the protests and how we adapted to the whole social injustice and the protests you've had for the last year downtown. Well, I've gone to a few. I've spoke at them before. Now, if you told me 3 years ago I'd be doing that, I would probably look at you like your head was on backwards, like other things. But again, you think to yourself, like I say, well, I don't conceive myself racist. I feel I treat everyone, but to look at it from someone else's perspective puts it to a different, totally, completely different perspective. And it makes me and it makes others, I'm sure at the police department and others in society look at, they say, well, I never looked at it that way. I mean, I've ever looked at, I mentioned I went to high school in town. I had 2 people of color in my class, the entire class. I graduated with, I don't know, 220 people. I've never looked at, boy, and I was friendly with both of them, still are. I played sports with them, the whole bit, hung around with them, but I never looked at what it was like to walk into a class of 40 people. Everyone's lily white, and I'm the one person of color walking into the classroom. I never thought of that. You know why? I never had to do it. I never did it. I never experienced that. And as a result of, again, speaking to many that are downtown at the protests that have been going on for the, rallies, whatever, for the last year or so, it definitely opens your eyes and makes you look at things from a different perspective. I've always thought, people are people. We always treat people the way you expect to be treated, treat them with the utmost respect, try to help them in any way you can. It doesn't make any difference to me. But again, not everyone's the same. And you learn there are police officers out there that may be more biased on things. And again, all we can do is train them to adapt them to what's the accepted norms. And we could go on for 6 hours here if you want to talk about systems that are broken. You mentioned, April, about, we're all handed these systems that are in place, and then people are looking at us going, well, you want to talk about the criminal justice system, we could have a debate on it for hours as far as how it goes. But again, we're doled out these systems. We're responsible to work within these systems, and there's many things in these systems that are broken. So the reality is we all have to listen. We all have to come together. We all have to get more diverse groups involved in the conversation, because I don't know what you're thinking. I can think I know what you're thinking. Same vice versa. You can think you know what I'm thinking, but again, I have no idea. So again, what I've learned out of especially the whole Black Lives Matters movement and so forth, it's made the police adapt their whole training, their whole I guess, mission statements as to what they do adapt differently as a result of everything that's going on. And it's made us certainly look at things differently. It's opened my eyes. I mean, again, not that I'm saying I've really done wrong things or thought differently, but it made me look at things from a different perspective and say, you know, something, I've never looked at it that way. I mean, I just never had to, I guess. So.
Right. Well, I appreciate that so much. And it does speak to this reality that in a small community like ours, where there's fewer persons of color, in majority white spaces, especially with leadership, it's hard to sometimes enter those spaces. And it gets easier when you've got leaders who will listen and who will say, I didn't think of it that way. And I didn't have to, and now I do. And we're here ready to listen and learn. So I've appreciated you for coming and being present, for your you continue to extend yourself in that way and to be available when needed. Steve Johnson as well. He's been become a friend to me, which has been great. And I'll say that just very, very in somewhat a vulnerable space and always learning, always growing. Making a friendship. I haven't had coffee with him in a while, but as I was over time, like sitting with sitting with him and having coffee, it's sitting with an officer in uniform that can be intimidating, right? But doing it and getting to know his humanity felt good, and it felt like, oh, right, like I have a different thing that I can learn. And again, easier for me in some ways. I will name it. It's like, colorism is real, and because I'm a light-skinned woman, there's other advantages. I have my proximity to whiteness in a white family. All that enters in, but just having some space and time and listening myself and learning and growing on what it means to be a law enforcement officer, as much as it's hard sometimes to sort of like sit there, I'm like, it's really important. So I really appreciate this conversation, all of you. And I hope that what we can continue to do is have conversations that center in complexity and that are self-reflective. I will urge all of you to continue to keep doing the self-reflective work you can do to be able to move through this space and time that is challenging. And just before we close, and I'll give some folks, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If not, that's all good. We'll be ending in just a couple minutes. But what's one thing you're going to commit to continue to learn and grow as we end? We're getting close to the end of the year, but what are some things that you want to, for the future, continue to learn and grow? And I'll start with you, Sean, since I'm still on you. So like, what's one thing you want to continue to lean into and learn and grow?
I want these conversations to continue, as I've expressed to you on many occasions. I mean, I want to be part of the conversations. Tell me what we need to do to correct the social injustice. I mean, I don't want people coming into town feeling differently, feeling they're not welcome. I mean, I was at a town council meeting, an example, a month ago, and they were talking about the businesses and Airbnb and the whole, when they actually appointed that committee. And one of the girls, and I actually went and talked to her after, because I was shocked. And she said, well, you have a restaurant in town that doesn't accept people of color or people working there. I almost fell over because I'm thinking, who in the world I had to go ask her what the price. So you need to tell me, just because I can't even imagine. First of all, you shouldn't feel that way. I mean, you should never, whatever action happened, shouldn't happen to put you in that situation. I mean, I would never have thought that of a restaurant. I just wouldn't have. And for her to tell me her story and what happened, and I certainly won't mention the restaurant by any means, but it opened my eyes to a different look. Like, wow. I mean, we all look at things through our own eyes, and we don't see what people see with another set of eyes. So I hope, I guess in closing, these conversations continue. I would love to be part of conversations, share the problems with me, because I want to be part of the solution, to make this a better place. People should not feel comfortable. It's a wonderful community, uncomfortable. It's a wonderful community, and they should not feel comfortable living here. I could care less what color or anything they are. They really shouldn't. Everybody should feel welcome. So I want to be part of the solution.
Thank you. And I just think it does model for other persons of color who may not want to raise awareness. Because one of the conversations that we've had is a lot of people say, well, why don't people tell us and speak up? Because we have, and sometimes people haven't listened. So, but you're listening, you're here, you're even in a situation where you have a person of color moderating something, you show up, you listen, you model what it looks like to be here and to share. So just that alone is really powerful, and I'm grateful for it. And there's so much more that you've offered this evening and beyond. So thank you for that, Brigitte. And then Tim, what's one thing that you're going to keep learning as we move through these months and years ahead?
Well, one thing I'm going to continue to do, is learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've started that. I'm continuing to learn, and I want to really pass that knowledge on, share that with the staff and the board and the public, and, to really create a welcoming environment in the library, because we are free and open to all. And I want people to feel that they can come in our doors and feel like they belong there.
Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Tim, and then we'll wrap up.
Earlier this summer, I was able to, I had a grant to go to Alabama and do some civil rights research, went on the civil rights trail, and over and over and over and over again, I was just struck by not only, the inspiring stories of leaders of the movement and the great danger they put themselves in, the risk that they put their lives on the line, in some cases lost their lives, lost their homes, lost a lot just to, for example, be able to vote or to participate in a voting march. They might lose their job, they might lose their home, and everyday people. So the other thing, I learned was that, you mentioned, I think one of you, sorry, I can't remember, one of you mentioned how, these lessons aren't new. They have been around for a long time. And so I'm reminding myself of that yes, we've had the opportunity to learn about all this stuff long before George Floyd. And I think, it's almost kind of like I'm at the point where, like, okay, there's no excuse, Tim. You have to take this knowledge, continue to learn, as Brigitte and Chief Lacey said, to continue to learn, but then take action. So that's what I'm focusing on. What can I do as an action, whether that's in being involved in my community or doing things at school? That's what I'm committing myself to.
Well, I appreciate all of you for making commitments and continuing to do the work that you do. Please commit to taking care of yourselves, because we want you to be at the top of your game to keep doing the work that you do in our community. That means a lot to me. And if there's anything that I can do or ARC can do to help support you in your individual communities, your work communities, please let us know. And last but not least, we did put a survey link in the chat. We'll be sending an email out to folks as well. Please let us know what you think. The next in the series will be in October about the masks we wear. That will be a really fun conversation. And please encourage folks, this will be recorded and we will likely share it out. Please encourage people to look at it and to have a sense that we can have conversations about things that are complicated and be self-reflective and do that in a way that's productive. So I'm grateful to all of you for doing that with me tonight. And just a lot of love to you as a panel and to the people listening and to the community. Really grateful, and see you next time in October. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. Really grateful to you. And thank you, Brigitte and Amanda, for making the space. Okay. Signing off. Lots of love, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, April.
Thanks, everyone. Talk soon.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Right.